I can't, it's all, Adam.
Thank you, ma'am.
Kokesh?
Kokesh, yes, ma'am. Good morning. I think my background can best be summarized by a form that I filled out 9 June 1999 at the Military Entrance Processing Station after enlisting in Santa Fe, New Mexico, entitled, Why I Joined the Marine Corps. I feel a responsibility to take part in the national defense in some way. For whatever short amount of time and whatever minuscule part of it that I am, I would like to do my part, and I feel the Marine Corps is the best way for me to do it. I am also joining for the experience and self-growth that comes with being a Marine. The experiences are priceless, and many cannot be had anywhere else. I would only hope that anyone considering joining the military today for those reasons of which I am very proud of realize that they have a higher calling in serving their country to restore faith in our system of governance before they make themselves ready to fight and kill and die in the United States of America, knowing that they may end up dying for a lie. I joined the Marine Corps, or I shipped to boot camp June 18, 2000, and checked into my reserve unit at the end of that year after completing artillery training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and went to college at Claremont McKenna in Southern California. And in the run-up to the war, I believed the narrative that was being put forth by this administration. I believed what Colin Powell said at the UN, and still I believed that the war would not be in this nation's best interest, and was against it from the beginning. But after the war, after the invasion, at the beginning of the occupation, I felt that what we were doing was cleaning up our mess and genuinely responsible foreign policy and trying to do good by the Iraqi people. So I volunteered to go with the Civil Affairs Unit. And in the 2 weeks between being activated and deploying to Iraq, I learned that what we were doing in civil affairs was going to be working with the Iraqi people on schools and mosques and clinics and water projects. And to me, it sounded like exactly what the president was promising that we would be doing in Iraq. And I was very excited about that. I thought that we were going to be the tip of the spear. And I had to go to Iraq myself to find out that that was not the case, and that the greatest enemies of the Constitution are not to be found in the sounds of Fallujah, but rather right here in Washington, D.C. On our way into Iraq, I was issued this Rules of Engagement card that is supposed to be the gold standard of conduct and use of force for the military in the occupation of Iraq. They couldn't even cut the card square. But if I may, it begins with, nothing on this card prevents you from using deadly force to defend yourself. Section 1. Enemy military and paramilitary forces may be attacked subject to the following instructions. Positive identification is required prior to engagement. PID is, quote, reasonable certainty, unquote, that your target is a legitimate military target. If no PID, contact your next higher commander for decision. Section 1, Delta. Do not fire into civilian populated areas or buildings unless the hostile force is using them for hostile purposes or, if necessary, for your self-defense. Section 3 reads, you may detain civilians if they interfere with mission accomplishment, possess important information, or if required for self-defense. It says at the end, remember, attack only hostile forces and military targets. And at the very end, it says, these ROE will remain in effect until your commander, and then the rest of that sentence is actually cut off here. And that just goes to show that not only are the rules of engagement as they're strictly outlined by this card to contradict themselves and to be confusing and to put Marines in a situation where their morals as defined by those rules are put at odds with their survival instincts. And I think that it's fundamentally criminal to put brave young Americans in that situation. I was attached to Golf Company 2-1, my civil affairs team, before the siege of Fallujah, and we were called with them to support them in the blocking of the two bridges over the Euphrates River on the west side of Fallujah after 4 Blackwater security agents were killed and had their bodies burned and strung up on the northern bridge in April of 2004. Shortly after arriving there, first slide please, there was a checkpoint shooting to the west of our position where a man coming home from work at the end of the day did not see the newly emplaced Humvee, desert colored against the desert background, manned by Marines wearing desert colored camouflage. And a Marine there decided that he was approaching at too fast a rate of speed and emptied into the vehicle with a .50 caliber machine gun. We later justified this by saying that there were, that hearing the vehicle burning afterwards, there were rounds cooking off from the heat, although it's clear from this picture and from every other examination that there were no rounds in the vehicle cooking off that would have made punctures in the outer body of the vehicle. Next slide, please. The second round, or the round that hit this Iraqi gentleman in the chest, hit him so hard that it broke his chair and knocked him back in his seat. Next slide, please. The vehicle was dragged into our compound where we were sleeping, as you can see in the background where the vehicles are parked in this picture. This is a picture that I'm very ashamed of. having posed with this dead Iraqi as a trophy picture. But what felt awkward to me at the time was not that, not so much that I was taking a picture, but rather that I had not killed this man, and I was I was taking a trophy of someone else's kill. And my entire team was present for this, including a major, and numerous members of my team took similar pictures. At the first Winter Soldier investigation in 1971, one of the Vietnam veterans held up a similar photograph and said, "Don't ever let your government do this to you. Don't ever let your government put you in a position where this attitude towards death and this disregard for human life is acceptable or common." And yet we are still doing this to service members every day as long as this occupation continues. Next slide, please. At one point during the siege of Fallujah, it was decided that we were going to allow women and children to leave the city. We thought this was the most magnanimous thing we could have done, and yet our rules were to let only women and children out. And so any male over the age of 14, or as we were told, anyone who was old enough to be in your fighting holes too old to get out of the city, was turned away. And so my responsibility during this time at certain points was to go out on this bridge and turn away families. And like I said, we thought this was the most magnanimous thing we could have been doing. However, it's clear that we're giving these families an impossible choice, whether they could stay together with their families intact, or split their families up and hope that half of them end up with something better. But all that we had to offer them was literally the mosque across the street. Good luck. And what happened there can only be described as either the deliberate or careless creation of internally displaced refugees. During the siege of Fallujah, our rules of engagement changed so often that we were often uncertain of them. And at one point, anyone who was described as a suspicious observer would be a legitimate target. Anyone holding a cell phone, binoculars, or at one point, anyone out after curfew. And this led to an incident where Marines were firing at firefighters and cops silhouetted against a fire that our indirect fire had caused, who were trying to help out the civilians that were being affected by that fire. After the siege of Fallujah, my team was tasked with setting up a checkpoint at the Civil Military Operations Center at Fallujah, where we detained various personnel at SNAP VCPs during the summer of 2004, many of whom were harassed unnecessarily. One such person had a bag of cash in his back seat and was harassed by human intelligence officers before being released. And their abuse of him was such that they were even reprimanded by a higher officer, but they determined that there was no reason to detain him and he was let go. If that money was not intended for the insurgency before this incident, I have to assume that it was afterwards. I realized that we in civil affairs were a fig leaf. We were there to make the occupation look good. We even came up with a slogan to justify our existence to the infantry commanders that we had to beg to be able to get out and do our missions. And it was, "We care so that you don't have to." If there are any questions from members of Congress as to the particulars of any incident that I've mentioned here, I would be happy to provide names of all personnel and units involved, dates, and grid coordinates. I hope that my testimony has helped shed light into some of the shadows that make up our collective denial of the occupation of Iraq. As a country, we have allowed fear to overwhelm us and have failed ourselves by allowing this criminal occupation to have ever happened. You do not have to have served to see how recent pressures on the military are making us weaker as a country. You do not have to have witnessed the occupation firsthand to see its absurdity. And you do not have to be an expert on international relations to see the disastrous effects of our foreign policy. Ignorance, propaganda, and distraction have made up the last refuge of those Americans who would rather remain in denial about our current state of affairs. Now that we are facing the truth, and the majority of America is at least nominally against the occupation of Iraq, what fate will we claim for our nation? For some, their silence will be their hypocrisy, and their inaction will be their complicity with the destruction of our great union. But I have an unwavering faith in my country, and I know that the self-righting ship of the United States of America will one day regain its course, but only with the great toil, courage, and sacrifice that it demands of its winter soldiers. I am proud to call myself one of them today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.